This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. We suddenly have a lot of bad news for Elon Musk on our hands. A striking new federal court ruling just ordered the Trump administration to reinstate thousands of federal workers in their jobs, a big blow to Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency. Meanwhile, 2 new polls show approval of Musk absolutely cratering, and critically, the polls show large majorities have turned against Musk's core mission of gutting the government. So what if the public mobilization against Musk and Tesla is really working? Today we're talking about this question with Paul Waldman, who has a good new piece on his Substack, The Cross Section, arguing that the public campaign against Tesla is actually good for our country. Great to have you back on, Paul.
Thanks.
So a federal district judge in California just ruled that the Trump administration must reinstate thousands of workers across 6 federal agencies, finding that their terminations were done improperly. This impacts Treasury, Veterans Affairs, Agriculture, Defense, Energy, and Interior departments. The key thing about the ruling is that the judge found that the firings were in bad faith. The cover story was that this was poor performance by all these workers. The judge slammed this as a sham. This is exactly what the municipal unions bringing the lawsuit argued. It's a sham. Paul, this really goes to the impudence, the audacity of these firings. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, and it does harken back to what happened in Trump's first term, where one of the things that was characteristic of a lot of the court cases where Trump's moves got struck down was that over and over judges, up to and including the Supreme Court, told the Trump administration that they were being sloppy and dishonest in their court filings and the way they went about things. This is what happened in the case when they tried to add a citizenship question to the U.S. Census, that the Supreme Court basically said, you're being dishonest about what the purpose of this was. And we saw that in this ruling, too. The Office of Personnel Management basically told these agencies to fire all these workers and to do it with the phony rationale that it was because of their performance. And then they got into court, and the Trump administration said, well, the Office of Personnel Management wasn't actually ordering it. They were just giving advice to the agencies, and the agencies did it. And they said that the acting director of the OPM could not come in for cross-examination, even though he signed a statement that said that this was what was actually going on. And the judge basically told them that they were lying to him. And it's one thing that's characteristic of courts, whether you're talking about Republican appointee judges or Democratic appointee judges, they really don't like it when the parties involved come in and lie to them. And so you could tell how angry this judge was.
You know, this gets at a broader thing, which is this constant bad faith effort to shift around who's doing what. First, Musk is in charge of these firings, Trump himself tells us. Then when they figure out that that just might be unconstitutional, They say, oh, he's just, he's advisory. He's not running DOGE. And then they constantly contradict each other on these questions of who's doing the firing at even these lower levels, right?
And in some cases, it's just that they're impatient, that they could get rid of a lot of these employees if they do what's called a reduction in force, where you eliminate positions and then there's a whole process involved. And the people who are being their positions are being eliminated. They may have the opportunity to get different jobs in the government, but there is a law that governs how that's supposed to take place. There were a lot of reductions in force when the Clinton administration did its whole reinventing government thing, but it's just not good enough for them. They want to do it fast. They want to have that kind of, move fast and break things and this sort of shock and awe. And it goes along with vilifying the federal workforce. And I think that that's one of the things that I hope is coming out of this. Even if many of those people's jobs can't be saved, and it is a tragedy, we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of people who lose their jobs, that I think the American people are getting a kind of an education in all the different things that government does. Republicans want to convince people that it's this sort of cliched version of what a federal worker is, that it's just some pencil pushing person. Trump said just the other day when he was asked about the firings that, these people, they're not even coming to work. And I think that people are beginning to get get an understanding that when you talk about federal workers, you're talking about a nurse who works in a VA hospital, a scientist who works for the Department of Agriculture trying to help farmers maximize their crop yields, meteorologists who work at NOAA, that these are people who actually are doing important work. And so a lot of what the PR aspect of what they're doing is to try to say that these people don't matter, that they're incompetent, and that it's okay to just fire them en masse.
Exactly. Speaking of the public getting educated about this, we have two new polls to talk about. The new Quinnipiac poll finds that only 36% of voters approve of how Musk and DOGE are dealing with federal workers. 60% disapprove. 57% view Musk unfavorably. 54% say Musk and DOGE are hurting the country. Meanwhile, the new CNN poll finds that only 35% view Musk positively. 62% say the cuts to government are going too far, while only 37% say the cuts don't go far enough in eliminating waste and fraud. Paul, CNN even used the bullshit cutting waste and fraud language, and they only got a small minority in support of that. Would you have expected this?
Maybe not, but I think the lesson is that it harkens back to an old political science finding that people are ideological conservatives but operational liberals. And what that means is that in the abstract, if you ask them, do you think government should be smaller? Most people will say yes. But when you get to the things that government actually does, it turns out they want the government to do more of everything. And so what happens in a situation like this is people are kind of getting kind of an extended look at what the government does. And so it's one thing for Musk to come in and say, we're going to find all this in inefficiency and waste, fraud, and abuse. And that sounds good. But then when you actually see what's happening and you see the services that are being withdrawn and people start hearing, maybe there's not going to be anybody cleaning the bathrooms at national parks, and all the details start to come out over an extended period, which is what we have now, all of a sudden, people say, wait, maybe this isn't so great after all. And I don't want these cuts to happen.
I want to highlight another number from the CNN poll that really confirms what you're saying and adds a dimension to it. 55% say Trump's cuts to federal programs will do economic harm. This is welcome news. The whole cover story for these types of cuts is always, in addition to what you said, that federal workers are vermin that should be stamped out en masse or whatever. The other story is cutting government will allow the economy to roar forth. People like you and me really struggle to get across the idea that cutting government hurts the economy. So I got to think having a thoroughly repulsive figure like Musk hacking away at the government with a machete has got a hidden upside. It's persuading people to like the government, and also with Trump fucking up the economy so visibly, maybe people are starting to realize that cutting government is bad economically as well. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think the circumstance and the confluence of a couple of different factors enables that argument to resonate with people because there is so much uncertainty right now. I'll bet you, I don't know if there are any polls to this effect, but I would imagine that 6 months ago, if you took a poll and asked people how tariffs work, a lot of them would have said, because they heard Donald Trump say it, that, oh, other countries pay the tariffs. But they don't think that anymore. They've been exposed to a bunch of news about it. There's been lots of media coverage about how the tariffs are hurting the American economy and will hurt the American economy if they go into full force. And you have things just like the price of eggs going up. And then you have these stories of all these job losses. And I think that's beginning to register with people that this is at a volume that really could affect the economy. You know, if you throw 200,000 government workers out of their jobs, and people are seeing that in their own communities. It turns out that, you know, these workers are distributed all over the country, and people are seeing people that they know maybe lose their jobs or have their jobs threatened. And so all of these economic stories are all coming together. And if you're even marginally attentive to the news, you're seeing lots and lots of stories about how uncertain everything is and people's worries about the economy and risks that we could be plunging into a recession. And all of a sudden, it doesn't sound so much like kicking a bunch of people who work for the government out of work is a great idea. So it's that kind of confluence of factors and the timing that is making that make more sense to people.
Spring is finally here. For us in DC, that means cherry blossoms, warmer weather, and more nonsense from the administration. To stay up to date on all the news that you need to know, there's no better place than the DSR Network, and there's no better way to enjoy the DSR Network than to become a member. Members enjoy an ad-free listening experience, access to our Discord community, exclusive content, and more. Use code DSR2025 for a 40% discount on sign-up at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. That's code DSR2025 at thedsrnetwork.com/buy. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have zero sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with zero sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
Yeah, and a lot of this has to do with the hubris of Musk and Trump as well. They just figure that their magical propaganda powers can just roll over anything in their path, and all of a sudden real live events are actually persuading people otherwise. I want to talk about your piece. You wrote about the boycotting of Tesla, and you got into how all these far-right figures like Sean Hannity and also some dude who occupies the Oval Office have now gone out and endorsed Tesla, instructing the MAGA masses to love it. This is creating a new culture war that puts Trump and Republicans in the awkward position of saying that Teslas are awesome while they do everything possible to roll back former President Biden's policies facilitating the transition to electric vehicles. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, you know, it was already happening, but I think that Trump is only accelerating it. And so you're seeing these protests outside of Tesla dealerships, even in some cases vandalism and people painting graffiti on the side of Teslas, especially the universally despised Cybertruck. And then what happens is the president and people like Sean Hannity decide, oh, we have to come to Elon Musk's defense. And so Sean Hannity goes on his program and says he's buying a Tesla and it's a fantastic car. And that is only going to to polarize this Tesla as a kind of a vessel of identity. And it's important to understand that that's what cars are already. You know, all of the consumer goods that we buy say something about us. And that's the way they're marketed to us, that if you buy this, this is what kind of person you can be. And the cars are, that's true of cars more so than any other consumer product. It's always about who you are if you buy a Prius or if you buy a Ford F-150. And what they are now convincing people of, even more than they were before, is that if you buy a Tesla, you know, maybe that means you're kind of a right-wing jerk. And so this is also happening in this difficult policy context where, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, there is up to a $7,500 tax credit for buying an EV. And we don't know yet whether that's going to survive. Now, you would think that would be in Elon Musk's interest to keep that that tax credit there because a lot of people use it when they buy Teslas. And you would think he would tell Trump, make sure that we don't let Congress take away that tax credit. But Musk has said that he thinks that if the tax credit disappears, it'll hurt his competitors more than it'll hurt him, and that people will still buy Teslas, but they won't buy electric cars that are made by Ford and GM and Hyundai and et cetera. And so this is a big unanswered question. We don't know what's going to happen to that tax credit. But what we do know is that everything the Trump administration is doing is an attempt to dismantle every single climate-related policy that the Biden administration passed. And this was one of the biggest. We just saw how Lee Zeldin, the EPA administrator, now says he's going to claw back $20 billion in funding that was supposed to go for community green projects like, upgrading homes and businesses to be more energy efficient and things like that. We don't know how that's going to turn out, whether he can legally do that, but they're trying to. They're trying to kill anything that has the word climate in it. And this may be one of the casualties too. But I don't think, even though taking away that tax credit could definitely hurt EV sales, the trajectory is still upward for EV adoption. And that's not something Trump is going to be able to stop.
Absolutely not. He really won't be able to, and he really wants to as well. Let's talk about the ruling a little more. It's not a guarantee of good news long term. There's still a pretty good chance that a fair amount of these workers could lose their jobs. Do you want to talk about that element of it?
Yeah. So this judge said that the way that they went about firing all these people was basically fraudulent, that they sent them all letters and said, we're firing you because of poor performance. And in fact, for almost all of them, that performance was good. And they had the documentation to prove it. And so that was on false pretenses. So even if they're going to be rehired, however, the Trump administration can probably still get rid of a great many of them. They're going after probationary employees precisely because they do not have as many civil service protections as people who are not probationary. Now, what that means is that usually that you've been in your job for less than a year, but it also applies to people who have gotten promoted and are in the first year after a promotion. So they may have worked for the federal government for 20 years, but they just got a promotion and now they're probationary again for another year, and they don't have as many protections and they could be fired. The administration is already planning to do widespread reductions in force, which allow them to eliminate entire positions. And it's a little more cumbersome bureaucratically to do that. There are rules they have to follow, and they may have to give a lot of those employees the opportunity to apply for other jobs. And there's an appeals process, and it just can't be as quick, but it's probably going to allow them to eliminate a lot of those positions and in the end achieve something like the same number of job cuts from the federal government that they're trying to do kind of all in one fell swoop.
Right. Although it's going to take them a long time to get this done. A lot of this is going to face litigation. Anything that slows these guys down is a positive. I want to point to another positive thing about the ruling. One of the core questions right now is whether Musk and Trump can successfully usurp entirely Congress's role in allocating government funding for the federal workforce. Now, obviously, as you're pointing out, the executive branch and agency heads do have some say over the makeup of their workforces, but the control is not unlimited. Congress has circumscribed it, and that, to me, is what the ruling confirms. Like you say, we don't know what's going to happen in the long run, but it's important to have these principles reaffirmed, isn't it? It's really, I think, a blow to them in some fundamental sense that they have to now talk their way or argue their way around these court rulings that are really affirming some bedrock principles of the republic.
Yeah, and in a lot of these cases, what this all comes down to is, do they have to obey the law or not? And what the administration is saying over and over again is, no, we really don't. We can just decide that we don't like that law. They're trying to do that with impoundment so that they can just not spend money that Congress has appropriated. They're trying to do that even on things like birthright citizenship, which could not be clearer in the Constitution. Trump is asking the Supreme Court to just say that, yeah, if you want to disobey the Constitution, you can. And so we see that in these one after another of these court cases. The grounds on which they're being struck down is that there's a law there that says how you're supposed to go about this if you want to do this, and you're not following it. But to the administration, that's just something that is for the little people is to obey the law. And that's certainly kind of the sort of animating spirit of Elon Musk and DOGE and Trump himself, that, sure, these things are written into statute or written into the Constitution. But, one of the interesting things that is different this time around, what we saw in Trump's first term, a lot of the time there would be the White House counsel, some other counsel, who at various key points would say, you can't do that, it's against the law. And then they wouldn't actually get to do the thing that Trump wanted to do. Those lawyers have all been replaced with yes men who, no matter what Trump proposes, are going to say, sure, let's go for it. And the tragic part is, in a lot of cases, that may work. Even if they don't end up prevailing before the Supreme Court, they can create all kinds of damage that it's going to take years to undo. So, for instance, they've essentially shut down the USAID right now. It could be there are court cases about this that eventually up to the Supreme Court says to them, you can't do this. You can't just cancel all these contracts and fire all these people and dismantle this agency. You have to reinstate all of it. But by the time that ruling comes down, it may be too late. All those workers could have gone off and found other jobs, and the programs that are taking place overseas can't be rebuilt because health clinics have shut down. That may be what they're counting on, that even if they lose in court, by the time it gets settled, they will have done so much damage that rebuilding it will take forever.
And damage is their goal. We should be clear they're trying to basically destroy the U.S. state. I do want to stress, though, that what you're getting at really underscores why it's important to have all this polling showing that large majorities think Trump and Musk are overstepping their roles. It's not just that the public isn't buying the idea that government is bad and should be swept away in massive fashion, though that is good. It's also that the public is getting a crash course in how our system works and why we should care about Congress's powers vis-a-vis the president. To end on an optimistic note, this confluence, as you put it, there are some heartening elements here. It's really not that easy for Trump and Musk to get their way here. And they have a tremendous amount of power. They're trying to do a tremendous amount of damage, but they're also running into tremendous resistance.
Yeah, I think that could have both short and long-term benefits. So one of the things we know about Trump is that when he sees political danger, he pulls back. I don't know how personally committed he is to Musk's project. And at the point where it looks to him like it's really hurting him, it's really hurting Trump politically, he'll rein it in. We've seen that many times. And so political organizing and people turning against it may have the effect of mitigating some of the damage. And then in the long term, if it shows people how important government is, when the time comes where Democrats have to try to rebuild from all this destruction, it's going to be important to be able to show people why it's important and have them say, yeah, we want those agencies rebuilt. We want the education department to come back into doing what it was doing. We need people who are going to run for office and say that they will engage in that project and make government actually do what it's supposed to do to help people and not just be this kind of smoldering pile of ash.
100% beautifully said. Paul Waldman, it's always great to talk to you, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Greg.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.